That's how she learns her place. Those words froze my blood. It's been 3 years since that Christmas dinner, and I can still hear the echo of that laughter. A mother watching her son humiliate my daughter and finding it amusing. My name is Margaret Sullivan. I'm 58 years old. I'm a family attorney based in Boston, Massachusetts. I've spent 30 years of my career defending women who couldn't defend themselves. I've faced corrupt judges, abusive husbands, entire families protecting the abuser. But nothing, absolutely nothing, in my career prepared me for watching my own daughter being torn apart right in front of me at a holiday dinner table. This is a story I never thought I'd have to tell. A story about how one Christmas dinner destroyed a family, and how 30 seconds of silence changed the fate of 4 people forever. Because you see, they didn't know who they were dealing with. Let me take you back to that night. It was December 25th. I remember the exact date, of course. It was Christmas. But it was also 2 years after my husband, Robert, had passed away from a sudden heart attack, leaving me alone in that big house in Beacon Hill that used to be filled with laughter. My daughter, Caroline, my only child, had insisted I come to her place for Christmas dinner. "Mom, you can't spend Christmas alone in that house. Come over. I'm making Dad's favorite, prime rib with all the trimmings." My daughter, my Caroline, 32 years old, a chemical engineer, a brilliant mind, a brilliant woman who inherited her father's intelligence and my tenacity, or so I thought. I arrived at 6 p.m. at their home in Newton, a beautiful colonial-style house they'd purchased just a year before with the inheritance money Robert had left us. I'd given her the full amount of her share, against my accountant's advice. "Mrs. Sullivan, you might want to put some protections in place, just as a precaution." "A precaution for what?" I'd asked, annoyed. "In case your daughter married a man who turns out to be problematic." I should have listened. When I arrived, the table was already set. Everything looked perfect. Fine china, crystal glasses, candles, pine garland centerpiece. Caroline had been cooking for hours. I could smell it. The prime rib, the roasted vegetables, the homemade dinner rolls. The aroma transported me immediately back to our kitchen in Beacon Hill, to Robert carving the roast, to little Caroline sneaking bites of Yorkshire pudding from the kitchen. But something was different. Caroline was different. Her hair was styled differently, pulled back severely. She wore a high-necked sweater despite the warmth from the cooking, and when she hugged me, I felt her body tense, as if every muscle was on alert. "Honey, are you okay?" "Of course, Mom. Just tired from all the cooking." I should have pressed. I should have asked more. But there was her husband, Brad, smiling with that smile I'd always found too perfect, too rehearsed. "Margaret, so good to see you. Come in, come in." And behind him, like a dark shadow, was his mother, Patricia, 64 years old, also a widow, but a different kind of widow. Her husband had died 10 years earlier in circumstances that were never fully clear. A fall down the stairs at their home in Cape Cod. A fatal accident. The investigation closed quickly. I, with my 3 decades of experience in family law cases, had sensed something off from the day I met her at the wedding. But Caroline was so in love, so happy, that I kept my suspicions to myself. Another mistake that haunts me every single night. "Dear Margaret, such a joy to have you here," Patricia said in that saccharine voice she always used. "Caroline has prepared such a lovely dinner. My son is so lucky to have such a devoted wife." A devoted wife. Those words. As if Caroline were a servant who needed to earn her place in that house. The house she herself had paid for with her inheritance. We sat at the table. Brad at the head, naturally. Patricia to his right. Me across from her. And Caroline. Caroline between her husband and mother-in-law, looking trapped between 2 walls. Dinner started quietly. Too quietly. Patricia talked incessantly about her new interior design project, about her friends from the country club, about how wonderful it was to have her son living so close now. I ate silently. I observed. I watched Caroline serve the food with trembling hands. I watched Brad barely acknowledge her effort. I watched Patricia subtly criticize every dish. "The prime rib is a touch overdone, don't you think, son? The Yorkshire pudding is a bit flat." In my day, wives woke up earlier to make sure everything was perfect. And I watched my daughter, my brilliant, strong, independent daughter, shrink with each word. Then it happened. Caroline was refilling Brad's wine glass when her hand trembled. Just slightly. A few drops, maybe 3 or 4, fell onto the white tablecloth. The silence that followed was deafening. Brad slowly put down his fork. The sound of metal on china echoed like a gunshot in that dining room. "Caroline," he said in a dangerously calm voice, "do you see what you just did?" My daughter opened her mouth to apologize, but she didn't have time. What happened next was in slow motion, yet so fast I could barely process it. Brad didn't hit her. No. What he did was worse. He stood up slowly, deliberately. He picked up his wine glass, the one with the few drops spilled beside it, and he poured the entire contents over Caroline's head. Red wine cascaded down my daughter's hair, her face, her cream-colored sweater. She sat frozen, shocked, as the liquid dripped onto her lap, onto the floor. And then I heard the laughter. Patricia was laughing, not a polite chuckle, a full, delighted laugh. "That's how she learns to be more careful," she said with a satisfied smile. "A clumsy wife needs correction. I had to train my husband the same way. It's for their own good." I was paralyzed for exactly 30 seconds. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 30 years defending victims of domestic abuse, and I couldn't react when it happened right in front of me. But those 30 seconds weren't paralysis. They were calculation. Because in my mind, I began processing everything I was seeing with the cold precision of an attorney who'd seen this hundreds of times before. The power dynamics, the forced submission, the normalized humiliation, the complicit family member, and something more. I saw the wine glass trembling slightly in Caroline's hand before it happened. I saw Brad's disproportionate reaction to such a minor accident. And I knew this wasn't the first time. I stood up from my chair slowly, without saying a word. Brad looked at me with that arrogant smile, expecting me to yell, to make a scene, to get hysterical like he probably expected emotional women to do. But I didn't yell. I took my phone from my purse. My hands didn't shake once as I dialed a number that had been on my speed dial for 20 years. "Captain Morrison," I said in a voice so cold it surprised even me. "This is Margaret Sullivan. I need an immediate response unit at 47 Chestnut Street, Newton. Domestic abuse in progress, witnessed firsthand. I'm activating my phone recording now." And I did. I activated the recording, placed my phone on speaker on the table, and looked directly into Brad's eyes. "Repeat what you just did," I said. "Repeat what your mother just said. Please. I have all night." Brad's face changed color, from arrogant red to ghostly white in 3 seconds. "You can't. I'm an attorney who's specialized in domestic violence for 30 years, I said in that same cold voice. "I've prosecuted 218 men like you. I have direct contact with the district attorney's office. And you just committed assault and battery in front of a witness, me, and in front of your mother, who applauded and justified your abuse, making her a legal accomplice." I walked over to Caroline, who was sitting there with wine dripping from her hair, silent tears running down her cheeks. I helped her stand, carefully checking for any injuries. "Mom," she whispered. "Shh, sweetheart. I'll do the talking now." Brad took a step toward me, but I raised my hand. "If you touch me, that's 3 more charges. Witness intimidation, attempted assault, and obstruction of justice. Do you want to keep adding years?" Patricia, for the first time all evening, stopped smiling. "This is a family matter," she said, her voice shaking. "You have no right to—" "I have every right in the world. I'm a direct witness to a crime punishable by 2 to 5 years in prison under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 265. And you, ma'am, as an active accomplice who justified and celebrated the abuse, could face up to 4 additional years." That's when we heard the sirens. I'd told them 30 minutes, but I'd known Captain Morrison for 2 decades. He knew that when I called, I meant business. They arrived in 17 minutes. 3 police cruisers parked in front of the house. 6 officers came up to the door. Captain Morrison entered first, with that commanding presence he'd learned to project over hundreds of cases. "Attorney Sullivan," he greeted me formally. Then he saw Caroline, wine-soaked, still trembling. His expression hardened. "We have evidence of assault," I told him. "Direct witness, partial recording on my phone, and an accomplice present." The captain nodded and looked at Brad. "Sir," You have the right to remain silent. What followed was pure protocol. Brad was arrested. Patricia was arrested as an accomplice. Both were handcuffed and led to the squad car. Before they left, Brad looked at me with a hatred I'll never forget. "This isn't over," he said. "My family has connections. We'll see." "Your connections mean nothing when there's concrete evidence and witnesses," I interrupted. "And if you try to intimidate me or come near my daughter, I'll personally ensure you serve every single day of your sentence in the furthest facility from Boston. Trust me." They took them away, and for the first time that night, I held my daughter. She cried in my arms for what seemed like an eternity. Years of silence, of fear, of feeling trapped in a nightmare she didn't know how to escape. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked when she could finally speak. "I was ashamed, Mom. You've always been so strong, always defending other women. How could I tell you that I was the victim? How could I admit that I married exactly the kind of man you fight against?" I held her tighter. "That ends tonight." And it did. But this story doesn't end with an arrest. This story is just beginning. Because what Brad and Patricia didn't know was that the universe has a very specific kind of justice, and I was going to make sure that every single one of their actions had consequences. Sometimes we trust the wrong people. Have you ever been disappointed by someone you loved? If this story resonates with you, stay with me. I need to tell you what happened next, because the Christmas dinner was just the beginning. Before I tell you what happened after that night, I need you to understand something important. I need you to know who Caroline was before Brad, because when you see a woman destroyed by abuse, it's easy to forget that she was once a little girl who laughed without fear, that she was a teenager full of dreams, that she became a woman who walked through life with her head held high. Caroline was born on July 23rd, peak of summer. Robert and I had only been married 2 years when she arrived, filling our Beacon Hill brownstone with a cry that seemed like the most beautiful sound in the world. My husband was an architect, a gentleman, the kind you don't see anymore. He never raised his voice, never raised his hand. When we had disagreements, we'd sit in the living room with coffee and our favorite mugs and talk until we found common ground. That's how we lived. That's how Caroline grew up. Our daughter was curious from the start. I remember when she was only 4 and took apart the telephone in the living room because she wanted to hear how the voices sounded inside it. Robert laughed for half an hour when he found the pieces scattered across the floor. "This girl's going to be a scientist," he told me as we picked up screws from the carpet. And he was right. Caroline was always brilliant, not just intelligent, but with that special spark of wanting to understand how everything worked. Plants, machines, chemical reactions, people. When she was 12, she won her first science fair with a project on water purification. I remember her face when they gave her first place, a mixture of pride and that genuine humility she never lost. "Mom, do you think Dad's proud?" "Your father has been proud of you since the day you were born, sweetheart." Robert was there in the audience, eyes glistening with tears he didn't bother to hide. That night, the 3 of us went to Caroline's favorite restaurant, a little Italian place in the North End that made the best lasagna in the city. "To our scientist," Robert toasted, raising his glass of water. "To our family," I said. "To being together," Caroline added with that smile that lit up any room. Together. That word was like an anchor for us. We didn't have much money in those years. Robert's architecture career was just taking off, and I was still building my reputation as an attorney. But we had something more valuable. We had each other. Sundays were sacred in our house. Robert would cook. Prime rib was his specialty, a recipe he'd inherited from his mother in Vermont. He'd spend hours preparing the roast, making the Yorkshire pudding from scratch, perfecting the au jus. Caroline and I were his official assistants. She'd measure ingredients with scientific precision. I'd tell family stories that my husband loved to hear. "Did I ever tell you about the Henderson case?" I'd ask while chopping onions. "Mom, you've told us that case 20 times. Caroline would laugh. "But this time I have new details." And we'd spend afternoons like that, laughing, with the roast cooking and the smell of fresh bread that Robert insisted on making by hand, because store-bought doesn't taste the same. Those Sundays, God, I miss those Sundays. Caroline grew up fast. Too fast. Like all children do when you're not paying attention. Suddenly, she was 15, then 18, then entering college. She studied chemical engineering at MIT. She was always top of her class, not because she was an obsessive perfectionist, but because she genuinely loved what she did. She'd come home excited, talking about exothermic reactions, mass balances, industrial processes I could barely understand. "Mom, did you know we can convert organic waste into clean energy? It's fascinating." Robert and I would listen, mesmerized, proud to have a daughter so passionate about changing the world. When she graduated with honors at 24, Robert cried through the entire ceremony. He didn't bother hiding his tears. He was too happy, too proud. "That's my daughter," he'd tell anyone sitting nearby. "That's my Caroline." After graduation, we took a photo, the three of us together. That photo is framed in my living room now. Caroline in the middle, holding her diploma. Robert and me on either side, arms around her, all of us smiling. We didn't know it would be one of the last complete family photos we'd ever take. Caroline got a job immediately at a major pharmaceutical company. She was a researcher, developing new processes for producing affordable generic medications. Her dream had always been to do science that helped people. "I don't want to work just for money, Mom. I want my work to matter." And it did. Within 2 years, she was a project lead. She published 3 papers in international scientific journals. She traveled to conferences in Europe and Japan. She was independent, successful, happy. She lived alone in a small but cozy apartment in Cambridge. On weekends, she'd go running along the Charles River, meet up with college friends, visit museum exhibitions. And every Sunday, without fail, she'd come home for Dad's prime rib. That was our untouchable tradition. Until she met Brad. It was at an industrial engineering conference 5 years ago. He worked for a consulting firm, presenting a project on process optimization. Caroline was there representing her pharmaceutical company. "Mom, I met someone," she told me that afternoon on the phone, with an excitement in her voice I'd never heard before. My heart did a strange flip, not of joy, but that feeling every mother gets when her daughter is growing up, when she's about to share her life with someone else. "Tell me about him." "His name is Brad. He's an industrial engineer. He's smart, funny, and has incredible eyes." We talked for 3 hours after the conference. 3 hours, Mom. I didn't even realize how much time had passed. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to feel that pure joy I should have felt as a mother when her daughter fell in love for the first time, but something inside me stirred. A silent alarm went off that I didn't understand at the time. "When do we get to meet him?" "Soon. Very soon. I want you and Dad to meet him." 3 weeks later, Brad came to dinner at our house. He arrived exactly on time, with an expensive bottle of wine and flowers for me, well-dressed, hair perfectly styled, and that perfect smile I mentioned before. Too perfect. "Mrs. Sullivan, it's an honor to meet you. Caroline has told me so much about you and your work. I deeply admire what you do for women who are victims of abuse." The right words, the right tone, the right posture. Robert shook his hand. They talked about architecture and engineering, about projects and career prospects. My husband seemed comfortable, but I watched. I watched how Brad subtly interrupted Caroline when she spoke. I watched how he glanced at her while talking, as if monitoring her reactions. I noticed his smile didn't reach his eyes. I watched how, when Caroline mentioned a recent professional achievement, he quickly changed the subject to his own successes. Small details, insignificant to anyone else. But I'd been recognizing patterns for 30 years, and I recognized the warning signs. That night, after Brad and Caroline left, Robert found me in the kitchen washing dishes in silence. "What's wrong, love?" he asked, knowing my silence is better than anyone. "I don't know. Something's not right. Give it time. It's the first time you're seeing Caroline in love. It's natural for you to be protective." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was projecting my work experiences onto my personal life. Maybe I was being overprotective, but my instinct was screaming. The months passed. Caroline and Brad became inseparable. She started talking less about work and more about him. She stopped going to the gym because Brad preferred they spend that time together. She stopped going out with her girlfriends on Fridays because he wanted those to be their special nights. "Mom, I'm happy, really happy." I wanted to believe her. God knows I wanted to believe her. Then we met Patricia. It was 6 months later. At a family brunch Brad organized, he told us his mother had just moved from Cape Cod to Boston to be closer to her son. "She's all I have left since my father died," he explained with that rehearsed sadness. Patricia was unlike anyone I'd ever met, elegant in appearance, but with an energy that filled every space. She talked constantly, always steering the conversation back to Brad, about how wonderful he was, about how much she'd sacrificed to raise him alone after her husband's death. "It was a terrible accident," she said, eyes dramatically welling up. "He fell down the stairs. I've never gotten over it." But her body language didn't match her words. There was no real grief in her expression, just performance. And the way she looked at Caroline, assessing, measuring, deciding whether my daughter was good enough for her son. After that brunch, Robert and I talked until dawn. "That woman gives me a bad feeling," I said. "Me too. But Aranza? Caroline is an adult. We can't—" I know, but there's something wrong. I can feel it." Robert held me that night, as he had thousands of times in our marriage. "If something's wrong, Caroline will notice. We raised her to be smart, to be strong. Let's trust her." And we did. That was my mistake. A year later, Brad proposed. A planned proposal in the Berkshires, with rose petals and a string quartet. She said yes, crying tears of joy. When she told us, I hugged my daughter and told her I was happy for her. And part of me was. The other part, the experienced attorney part, was screaming in silence. The wedding was beautiful. 200 guests at a venue in Newport. Caroline was radiant in her white dress, like every bride should be. Robert walked her down the aisle. I remember him looking at me before giving her away, and in his eyes I saw the same concern I felt. But it was too late. We'd already said yes. We'd already given our blessing. The first months of marriage seemed normal. Caroline still came to the house on Sundays, though now Brad came too. We still made prime rib, though the conversations didn't flow as naturally anymore. Brad always had an opinion about everything. He was always correcting some detail, steering Caroline's stories back to himself. And Caroline started talking less. Then Robert died. It was sudden, a massive heart attack in his sleep. He passed peacefully without pain, but he left us too soon. 62 years old. We still had so many years ahead, so many more Sunday dinners, so many stories to create, so many grandchildren to meet. But he was gone, and with him, the balance of our family shattered. The funeral was a blur of grief. Caroline cried in my arms like she hadn't cried since she was a child. Brad was there, polite, respectful, but distant, as if fulfilling an obligation. He seemed more concerned with how he appeared than with comforting his wife. Patricia, meanwhile, spent the entire funeral comparing Robert's death to her own husband's death. "I know exactly how you feel, Margaret. I lost the love of my life too. Though I must say, my loss was more traumatic, because it was violent. Even in the midst of my grief, I recognized the manipulation. The weeks after the funeral were the darkest of my life. The house in Beacon Hill felt empty, filled with ghosts of a life that no longer existed. Robert's coffee mug still on the kitchen counter, his robe hanging in the bathroom, his architecture books in the study. Caroline came every day to stay with me. She'd make food I couldn't eat. She'd force me to shower, to get out of bed. "Mom, you have to keep going. Dad would want you to keep going." She was right. But moving forward without Robert felt like breathing without air. It was during those months that Brad started to change. Or maybe he didn't change. Maybe he just showed who he'd always been. He started suggesting Caroline shouldn't visit me so much. "Your mom is fine. She just needs to learn to be independent." He started criticizing her work, her clothes, her schedule. "Why are you getting home so late from the office? What are you really doing?" And Caroline, devastated by losing her father, feeling vulnerable, seeking stability, started giving in. She stopped coming as often. She stopped telling me as much. She stopped being the woman she was. I noticed it in the phone calls, the way her voice had lost its spark, the way she always spoke in whispers, as if someone were listening. "Honey, are you okay?" "Yes, Mom. Just tired from work." The same answer, over and over. And I, lost in my own grief, didn't press hard enough. Another mistake I carry with me. 6 months after Robert's death, the inheritance came through. Robert had been a successful architect. He'd invested well, saved for our future. He left both Caroline and me a substantial amount. I gave Caroline her full share, nearly $800,000. No restrictions. Mom, this is too much. You should keep more. No, sweetheart. Your father wanted you to be secure. He wanted you to pursue your dreams without financial worries. With that money, Caroline and Brad bought the house in Newton, a beautiful colonial that should have been a home filled with love, but it became a prison. The visits became less frequent. Caroline always had an excuse: work, house renovations, commitments with Brad's family. When I did see her, I noticed subtle changes. Hair always pulled back tight, more conservative clothes, heavier makeup. Mom, I just like this new style. But there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before: fear. And I, blinded by my own pain, by my own grief, didn't recognize it until that night. That Christmas night that changed everything. That night when I finally opened my eyes and saw that it had been happening right under my nose for 2 years. My daughter wasn't okay. My daughter hadn't been okay for a long time, and I'd been so consumed by my own sadness that I hadn't noticed. But that night, when I saw that wine poured over her head, when I heard that laughter, when I felt my blood run cold, that night I remembered who I was: Margaret Sullivan, attorney, fighter, mother, and nobody, absolutely nobody, was going to touch my daughter without consequences. As I'm telling you all this, I wonder where you're listening from. Write your city in the comments. Let me know you're there. The days after the arrest were strange, eerily quiet, eerily peaceful, as if the world had hit pause. Caroline stayed with me in Beacon Hill. I didn't want her going back to that house in Newton. Not yet. I needed her close, needed to know she was safe. I took her to her old room, the one we'd kept exactly as she left it when she moved out. Her twin bed with the sky blue comforter she'd chosen at 15, her diplomas and awards still hanging on the wall, the photo of her and Robert at her college graduation on the nightstand. Mom, it's been so long since I slept here, she said in a voice so small it broke my heart. I helped her change, gave her one of my clean pajamas, made her chamomile tea with honey, just like I used to when she was little and couldn't sleep. We sat on her bed, like we had on so many childhood nights. Tell me everything, I said gently. From the beginning. I need to know when it all started. Caroline was silent for a long moment. She stared at her tea, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. Finally, she spoke. Do you remember our honeymoon in Greece? Of course, 3 years ago. Caroline had come back with hundreds of photos: the impossibly blue sea of Santorini, the ruins of Athens, the sunset in Mykonos. In every photo, she was smiling. She looked radiant. She looked happy. On the last night in Santorini, Caroline continued, we were having dinner at this restaurant overlooking the water. I remember sending you that photo. I nodded. I remembered it perfectly. Caroline in a white sundress, the sunset behind her, her smile wide and genuine. We were drinking wine, celebrating. A waiter came to our table, a young Greek man, very friendly. He asked in English if the food was good. I said yes, that everything was delicious. We chatted for maybe 30 seconds. Caroline took a sip of tea. Her hands trembled slightly. When the waiter left, Brad went silent. I thought he was just enjoying the view, the moment. But when I looked at him, he had this expression I later learned to fear. What expression? Cold, distant, like I'd suddenly become a stranger. What happened? We finished dinner in silence, walked back to the hotel. I thought it would pass. Maybe it was the wine, or travel exhaustion. But when we got to our room, he closed the door and looked me straight in the eyes. Caroline paused, took a deep breath. He said one word, just one word. But the way he said it, with that weight, with that contained fury, made me understand it wasn't just a word. It was a verdict. What word? Slut. I felt my chest tighten. I asked him what he meant. He said he'd seen how I smiled at the waiter, how I prolonged the conversation unnecessarily, how I was clearly seeking his attention. Caroline, I told him he was crazy, that I'd just been polite, that I was like that with everyone. And then he laughed. But it wasn't a normal laugh. It was condescending, like I was a silly little girl who didn't understand the world. What did he say? He said maybe I didn't realize what I was doing, that maybe I was naturally so flirtatious I didn't even notice, that his mother had warned him that women who were too independent, like me, sometimes didn't know how to behave properly in a marriage. I felt rage rising in my throat, but I held it back. I needed to hear everything. I spent the rest of the night apologizing, Mom. Apologizing for something I didn't do, because he made me feel like maybe I had done something wrong without realizing it. Like maybe I needed to be more aware of how my actions could be misinterpreted. That was the first fracture, I said quietly. I didn't see it at the time. I thought it was a misunderstanding. I thought he was just being sensitive because it was our honeymoon and he wanted everything to be perfect. Caroline wiped away a tear that had started to fall. But the next day, at the airport on the way home, he bought me flowers, red roses. He hugged me and said he was sorry, that he'd overreacted. He said it was because he loved me so much that the thought of losing me made him irrational. The classic cycle: explosion, honeymoon, tense calm, explosion. I'd seen it hundreds of times in my cases, and now I was seeing it in my own daughter. When was the next time? 2 months later. We went to a work function at my company. It was a celebration. We'd closed a major contract. My boss, Dr. Harrison, congratulated me publicly, hugged me. An appropriate, professional hug, the kind you give in work settings. Brad confronted you. He screamed at me for the first time that night, said I'd humiliated him, that everyone at that party had seen how I let my boss touch me, that clearly I didn't respect our marriage. I explained that he was my boss, that the hug had been professional, that there were 50 other people there, but he wasn't listening. He kept yelling, called me naive, called me stupid, said obviously my boss wanted something more and I was too dumb to see it. Caroline leaned back against the headboard of her childhood bed, exhausted from reliving memories she'd clearly kept to herself for so long. I started being afraid to go out, afraid to talk to male colleagues, afraid to smile too much, afraid to wear clothes he might consider provocative. I started measuring myself constantly. Is this blouse appropriate? Is this conversation innocent? Could this smile be misinterpreted? Honey, that's psychological abuse. That's control. I know that now, Mom, but in that moment I just wanted things to go back to how they were in the beginning, when he was charming, when he made me feel special. I kept thinking that if I just behaved correctly, if I was the perfect wife, he'd go back to being the man I fell in love with. I recognized my own failure in that moment. All the times Caroline had canceled our plans. All the times she'd stopped coming over on Sundays. All the times her voice sounded muffled on the phone. I'd thought it was grief over Robert. I'd thought it was the natural adjustment of marriage. I'd thought it was busy adult life, but it had been isolation. Systematic isolation. Gradual, invisible control. When did it escalate beyond words? Caroline closed her eyes. 8 months ago, a few days after we bought the house. The house she'd purchased with her father's money. The money Robert had left her to have security and freedom. The irony was cruel. I was excited about the house. I wanted to decorate it, make it ours. I hired an interior designer, a young guy who came highly recommended by a friend. His name was Sebastian. I already knew where this was going. Sebastian kept coming over to take measurements, show me color options, furniture. He was always professional, but Brad didn't like it. He said I was spending too much time with that guy, that Sebastian clearly had intentions. I told him Sebastian was gay. Mom, Sebastian was openly gay. He was engaged to his partner. I showed Brad his Instagram where he was clearly with his boyfriend. But Brad didn't care. He said Sebastian could be bisexual, could be lying, that I was too trusting. He forbade me from continuing to work with Sebastian. I had to fire him, had to make up an excuse. Sebastian felt terrible. He thought he'd done something inappropriate. I had to lie to him. And that's when we had our worst fight yet. I told Brad he was being irrational, that he had no right to control who I worked with, that the house was mine too, bought with my money. Caroline opened her eyes. They were red, swollen. He pushed me against the wall. He didn't punch me, not with a closed fist, but he shoved me so hard I hit my head on the drywall. I saw stars for a few seconds, felt nauseous. He apologized immediately, cried, said he didn't know what came over him. that I'd provoked him by mentioning my money when we were supposed to be a team, that he was under so much stress at work, that his mother was sick and he was worried. And I forgave him, Mom. I actually forgave him. Because the next day he came home with a diamond necklace and took me to the most expensive restaurant in the city. He said he'd change, that he'd go to therapy, that he loved me more than anything in the world. Did he go to therapy? He went to 2 sessions, then said the therapist didn't understand him, that the therapist was biased toward women, that it wasn't fair. Of course not. Abusers never take responsibility. They always make excuses. They always blame others. They always play the victim. The months after were a roller coaster. Some weeks he was the perfect man, brought me flowers, wrote me sweet messages, treated me like a queen. Other weeks he was a stranger, cold, critical, controlling. And Patricia? I asked. Where was Patricia in all this? Caroline's face hardened. Patricia made everything worse, Mom. She moved closer to us 6 months ago, bought a condo 3 blocks from our house. 3 blocks. And she started coming over every day. Every single day. Sometimes without calling first. She had keys because Brad had given her a set. She'd walk in like she owned the place. One day I came home from work and found her reorganizing my kitchen, moving my things around, throwing away spices she said had gone bad, rearranging my dishes. I told her, as politely as possible, that I appreciated the help, but I preferred to organize my own kitchen. You know what she said? I shook my head. She said, "A good wife accepts advice from her mother-in-law. I raised Brad alone, working double shifts, sacrificing everything for him. The least you can do is let me help you be the wife he deserves." The wife he deserves, I repeated bitterly. Patricia had an opinion about everything. My clothes. That skirt is too short. What will people think? My job. You should consider reducing your hours. Men need their wives to be available. My cooking. My son's prime rib is too salty. You clearly don't know the right recipe. And Brad. Brad always defended her. Always. No matter how unreasonable she was, he took her side. He told me his mother had suffered so much, raised him alone, and I should be more understanding. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home, like I was living in his house, not mine, like I was a guest who needed to earn the right to be there. Caroline got up from the bed and walked to the window of her old room. She looked out toward the garden where Robert used to grow herbs for cooking. You know what the worst part is, Mom? What? Patricia told me about her marriage like it was something to aspire to. She told me how she trained her husband, how she corrected him when he misbehaved, how she taught him that she was the boss of the house. I always thought those stories were strange. She talked about hitting him with objects when he got drunk, hiding his money when he misbehaved, punishing him by locking him out of the house at night. A chill ran down my spine. And when she told me these stories, she'd laugh, Mom. She'd laugh like they were funny anecdotes about marriage, not abuse. Do you think she killed her husband? I don't know, but every time she mentions it, there's something in her eyes, something cold, something that scares me. Caroline came back to the bed, curled up next to me like when she was little and had nightmares. The first real hit, the first with a closed fist, was 4 months ago. It was so stupid, so ridiculously stupid. I'm ashamed to even tell you. Tell me anyway. I was cooking, making dinner. Patricia had come over and criticized everything. The cleanliness, yesterday's meal, my hair. I was tense, stressed. I was chopping onions with that knife Dad gave me. That Japanese one I loved. I remembered that knife. Robert had bought it on a trip to Japan. He'd paid a fortune for it because he knew how much Caroline loved to cook. Brad came home from work in a bad mood. Started complaining that the house smelled too much like onions. I explained I was cooking. He said I could have ventilated better. I told him the windows were open. And then, for no apparent reason, no provocation, he said, "You're useless. You can't do the simplest thing without screwing it up." I turned to look at him, surprised. He interpreted it as defiance. Caroline instinctively touched her jaw, as if the pain were still there. He punched me straight in the jaw. I fell to the kitchen floor. Dad's Japanese knife fell and chipped on the tile. Silent tears rolled down my face. I couldn't hold them back. I lay there on my kitchen floor, bleeding from my mouth, staring at Dad's broken knife. and all I could think was, "Dad, I need you. I don't know what to do without you." I held her tighter. Patricia was there. She saw the whole thing. You know what she did? What? She knelt next to me and said, "We wives have to learn when to keep our mouths shut. I learned that lesson many years ago. Now it's your turn." After that, Brad locked himself in his office. Patricia helped me clean the blood, gave me ice for my jaw, showed me how to cover the bruise with makeup. Yellow concealer first, then the right skin tone, then powder. She explained it all so calmly, like it was a normal beauty tutorial. I asked her if she'd ever been through this, if her husband had ever hit her. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "No, dear. I was smarter. I learned to control the situation before it escalated." The pieces were falling into place in my head. Patricia hadn't been a victim. Patricia had been the perpetrator, and now she was creating a second generation of violence, using Brad as her instrument. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "Because I was ashamed, Mom. Because I've watched you my whole life defending other women. Because you're strong, unshakable, brave. How could I tell you that I, your daughter, had become exactly the kind of woman you rescue? Plus," she continued, "Brad was always apologetic afterward. He'd always promised to change. He'd always convince me it was my fault for provoking him. And part of me was still in love with the man I met 5 years ago. I kept hoping he'd come back. But he's not coming back. No, because that man never existed. He was a mask, and the mask fell off when I was already trapped." We stayed silent for a long time. The living room clock chimed 3 in the morning. "What happens now?" Caroline finally asked. "Now?" I said with a determination I hadn't felt in years. "We make sure Brad and Patricia face the consequences of their actions. We'll use every legal resource at our disposal, and we're going to get your life back." "And if he gets out? What if he comes after me?" "He won't get out. Not if I can help it. And if he does, there'll be a restraining order so strong that he won't be able to even think about you without violating the law." Caroline finally smiled. A small, fragile smile, but genuine. "I missed you, Mom. I missed this warrior version of you. I never left, sweetheart. I just fell asleep for a while. But now I'm awake." That night we both fell asleep in her childhood bed, holding each other like when she was 5 and storms used to scare her. But this time the storm had already happened. Or so we thought. Because what we didn't know was that Brad and Patricia weren't going to give up so easily. And the real battle was just beginning. I still wonder if I did the right thing by calling the police that night, or if I should have planned more carefully. What would you have done in my place? The days after the arrest were an illusion of peace. Caroline stayed with me. We didn't talk much about going back to the Newton house. Neither of us wanted to have that conversation yet. In the mornings, I'd make coffee in the French press, just like Robert used to. Caroline would sit at the kitchen counter wrapped in one of my robes, looking out the window toward the garden. Sometimes we'd talk. More often we'd sit in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who know each other deeply. The first phone call came on day 4 after the arrest. I was in my home office reviewing documents to prepare the formal case against Brad and Patricia when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I don't answer unknown numbers, but something made me press the green button. Attorney Sullivan? The voice belonged to an older woman, refined, with that tone of authority that comes from years of privilege. "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm a close friend of Patricia Morrison. I believe we need to talk." Of course she was. "How can I help you? Or rather, how can I help you? I understand there's been a misunderstanding between your daughter and my dear friend's son." A misunderstanding. She called pouring wine over someone's head a misunderstanding. "Mrs. Whitmore, with all due respect, there was no misunderstanding. I witnessed an act of domestic abuse firsthand, which was documented by the authorities." "Oh, attorney, please. You're an experienced woman. You know how young marriages are. There are fights. There's tension. That doesn't mean you should destroy a successful man's life over a moment of what?" I interrupted. My voice came out colder than I intended. Silence on the other end. "What I'm trying to say," she continued in a more cautious tone, "is that Patricia has told me so much about her son. He's a good man, hard-working, devoted. And well, Patricia mentioned that Caroline can be rather Challenging. There it was. The narrative I knew would come. The victim provoked the abuser. The victim deserved it. The victim is the real problem. Mrs. Whitmore, let me be very clear. I have no interest in discussing my daughter's nature with you or anyone else. My daughter was the victim of abuse, and both Brad and Patricia will face the full legal consequences of their actions. That would be very unfortunate, she said. And now there was an edge to her voice. Brad comes from a very influential family. His uncle is a federal judge. His cousin works in the district attorney's office. It would be a shame if this situation became complicated for you in your law practice. A veiled threat. How predictable. Mrs. Whitmore, I've been in this profession for 30 years. I've faced threats from drug dealers, corrupt politicians, and powerful businessmen. If you think I'm going to back down because Brad's uncle is a judge, you clearly don't know who you're talking to. Furthermore, I continued, every word of this conversation is being recorded, as is my legal right, and any attempt at intimidation or interference with an ongoing case constitutes obstruction of justice. Do you wish to continue? She hung up immediately. I sighed and saved the recording in 3 different places: my phone, my computer, and the cloud. 30 years had taught me to document absolutely everything. Caroline appeared in the office doorway. Who was that? I told her about the call. I watched her face go pale. Mom, Eleanor Whitmore is one of the most influential women in Newton. If she's on Patricia's side, it doesn't matter whose side she's on. Justice doesn't work based on social connections. But even as I said those words, I knew they weren't entirely true. Justice should work that way. But in reality, connections mattered. Power mattered. Money mattered. And apparently, Brad had more connections than I'd anticipated. The second call came that same afternoon. This time, it was my assistant at the law office. Margaret, I need to tell you something. Linda sounded nervous. What is it? A man came by an hour ago. Said he was Brad Morrison's attorney. He left this. She sent me a photo via text. It was a lawsuit. A lawsuit for defamation, false accusation, and emotional damages. They were demanding $2 million in compensation. Against me. Against Caroline. He also left something else. Linda continued. A temporary court order suspending the restraining order against Mr. Morrison, signed by Judge Enrique Morrison, his uncle. Of course. How is that possible? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Favors. Phone calls between friends. The system working for those with the right connections. It's not legal, I said. I'm going to appeal immediately. Linda, contact Judge Hernandez. She owes me a favor. I need her to review this case personally. I will. I hung up and stared at the lawsuit on my phone screen. $2 million. An amount designed to intimidate, to scare, to make people give up. But I wasn't one of those people. Caroline came back to the office. She'd heard part of the conversation. Mom, this is getting out of control. Maybe we should— What? I looked directly at her. Back down? Let him get away with it? Let him keep hitting you because he has a judge for an uncle? No, but $2 million, Mom. That could ruin us. They're not going to win this lawsuit. It's a tactic. Pure intimidation. But I saw the fear in Caroline's eyes. And for the first time, I saw something else. Doubt. Honey, look at me. She did, though with effort. Are you thinking about going back to him? Silence. Caroline, answer me. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know, Mom. It's all too much. The phone calls, the lawsuits, the threats. And Brad. Brad has been writing to me. My blood ran cold for the second time that week. What? He's been sending me messages. Long messages from his lawyer's phone, saying he's sorry, that he's in therapy, that he finally understands what he did wrong, that Patricia is also getting psychological help, that if I give him one more chance, he'll prove he can change. Caroline, I know what you're going to say. I know it's manipulation. I know he's probably lying. But Mom, her eyes filled with tears, what if this time it's true? What if he really does change? We were married for 3 years. That has to mean something. I got up from my desk and took my daughter's hands in mine. Do you know how many times I've heard this exact same story? How many women have sat exactly where you are now, telling me exactly those same words? But I'm not them. You're right. You're not. Because many of them didn't have the luxury of having someone to help them get out. Many of them went back. And you know what happened? Caroline shook her head, though I think she already knew the answer. Some are in hospitals. Some are in wheelchairs. Some are in cemeteries. Brad wouldn't kill me. That's exactly what they all thought. We stayed in silence. I could see the internal struggle on my daughter's face, the rational part fighting against the emotional part, the part that knew the truth against the part that still wanted to believe in the fairy tale. "Let me show you something," I said. I took her to my home office, opened my laptop and showed her the statistics. Cold, concrete, undeniable numbers. 70% of women who return to their abuser after the first serious incident experience even more severe violence. 43% end up hospitalized within the first year. And look at this number. I pointed to a number in red on the screen. 127 women died in the United States last year from domestic violence. 127. Each one of them believed their partner would change. Each one of them thought they'd be different. Caroline stared at the screen with glazed eyes. But I also have other numbers, I continued. Women who left. Women who reported. Women who rebuilt their lives. 87% report better quality of life 2 years later. 93% say it was the best decision of their lives. And the other 7%? Some returned before we could fully help them. Some faced financial difficulties. But none, absolutely none, Caroline, died. My daughter collapsed onto the sofa in my office. "You just don't understand, Mom. It's not just physical fear. It's everything. The house we bought together. The plans we made, the friendships we built as a couple, the family we created. If I walk away, I lose all of that." "No," I said firmly. "If you walk away, you gain your life. Everything else is replaceable. Your life is not." But I feel so guilty, like I'm overreacting, like 3 incidents aren't enough to destroy a marriage. And there it was. The denial, the minimization, the syndrome I'd seen in hundreds of cases. "Caroline, look at me carefully. 3 incidents. That's 3 incidents too many. There's no acceptable number of times someone can hurt you. 0 is the right number. 0. But what will people think? My friends, my colleagues, his family. Do you care more about what strangers think than about your own safety? It's not that. It's complicated. No, sweetheart. It's simple. He hurt you. It's his fault. You're the victim. There are no nuances in that." Caroline stayed silent for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Can I at least read his messages? Can I at least hear what he has to say?" Every fiber of my being wanted to say no. I wanted to forbid her from having any contact with Brad, but I also knew that if I pushed too hard, I might drive her away. "Okay," I said cautiously, "but with conditions. First, I read the messages with you. Second, you don't respond without consulting me first. Third, we document everything in case we need to use it legally. Deal." That night, sitting in her room, Caroline opened her phone and showed me the messages. There were dozens, all from different numbers. The first one said, "Caroline, my love, I can't tell you how sorry I am. I'm devastated. These days in custody have made me think, really see what I've done. I was a monster to you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging for it. Please give me one chance to show I can change. I love you more than my own life." Classic. Self-flagellation followed by a declaration of love. The second. "I've been talking to a psychologist here. I've been diagnosed with impulse control disorder related to childhood trauma. I finally understand where my violence comes from. My mother. She hurt me badly when I was a child. I know it's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. I'm working on it. For you, for us." Now he blamed his mother. Interesting twist, considering Patricia had laughed when he humiliated Caroline. The third. "I saw that my lawyer filed a lawsuit against you and your mom. Please believe me. I didn't want that. It was my family's decision. I just want to resolve this privately, as a couple. Tell them to drop the lawsuit. Just give me a chance to talk to you face to face. No lawyers. No your mother's interference." There it was. The real goal. Isolate her from me. To talk in a private place where he could manipulate her without witnesses. "Do you see the pattern?" I asked Caroline. "What pattern?" First message. Self-victimization. Second message. blaming others for his behavior. Third message, trying to isolate you from your support network. This is the manipulator's playbook. Chapter 1. But Mom, what if he really is getting help? What if he really wants to change? If he really wanted to change, he'd respect the legal process. He'd respect your space. He'd not be using lawyers to intimidate us while writing you love messages. He wouldn't need to talk to you privately. Caroline knew I was right. I could see it in her face. But I could also see that part of her still wanted to believe the fantasy. The following days were hard. Caroline oscillated between moments of clarity and moments of doubt. Some days she was furious at Brad, determined to move forward. Other days she just stared at her phone for hours, rereading messages, questioning every decision. I tried to give her space while keeping her safe. It was a delicate balance. One afternoon, I found her in the garden, standing in front of the small herb bed Robert had cultivated. The rosemary had grown wild. The thyme had spread everywhere. The mint threatened to take over. Dad hated seeing neglected plants, she said without turning around. I stood next to her. Your father would want you alive and safe. That's all that would matter to him. Sometimes I wish he was still here. He always knew what to say. He always knew how to make everything seem simple. Your father was wise, but even he would struggle with this. Not because he wouldn't know the right answer, but because you're his daughter. And when you love someone, you want them to make their own decisions, even knowing they might be the wrong ones. Caroline turned to look at me. Do you think I'm making the wrong decision by hesitating? I think it's natural to have doubts. You were with him for 3 years. You built a life together. You can't just turn off those feelings like a faucet. But what I'm asking is that you don't confuse the love you felt for him with the danger he represents now. What's the difference? True love makes you feel safe. True love lifts you up. It doesn't tear you down. What Brad gave you wasn't love. It was control disguised as love. Caroline nodded slowly. You know what the hardest part is? She asked. What? Accepting that I spent 3 years in love with a lie. That the man I thought I knew never existed. That it was all a performance designed to trap me. It wasn't your fault, honey. I know that rationally. But my heart hasn't accepted it yet. I hugged her right there, between the overgrown rosemary and the invasive thyme, under the same sky Robert used to contemplate while cooking Sunday dinners. It's going to hurt for a while, I told her. But pain means you're healing. It means you're alive. That night, Caroline finally blocked all the numbers Brad had been writing from. It wasn't easy. She cried while doing it. But she did it. I'm ready, she said. I'm ready to fight. Then we'll fight. And we did. The next day, I filed a formal appeal against the suspension of the restraining order. I documented every threat, every phone call, every message. I contacted Judge Hernandez, who reviewed the case and confirmed that her colleague's order had been inappropriate. The restraining order was reinstated with even stricter terms. Brad couldn't come within 500 meters of Caroline. He couldn't contact her directly or indirectly. He couldn't send third parties to speak to her. Any violation would mean immediate imprisonment. I also filed a comprehensive lawsuit for domestic abuse, aggravated assault, harassment, and psychological damages. I asked not for $2, but for $3 million in compensation for Caroline. Not because we needed the money, but to send a message. They weren't going to intimidate us. They weren't going to scare us. They weren't going to beat us. But while I fought in the courts, Brad and Patricia were fighting on another battlefield. One I hadn't anticipated. One that almost destroyed us. The social war. It started 3 weeks after the arrest. At first it was subtle. So subtle I almost didn't notice. Caroline had started going out more. Baby steps. The grocery store. The hair salon. She was trying to reclaim some semblance of normalcy while we waited for court dates. She came back from the salon one afternoon with a pale face. What happened? I asked immediately. Linda, she said. Linda had been her stylist for 5 years. A cheerful woman who always had stories to tell. She acted strange, cold, distant, barely spoke to me the whole time. Maybe she was having a bad day. No, Mom, it was more than that. When I was paying, another client came in, Fernanda. I know her. We've run into each other there dozens of times. We always chat. But today she saw me and just turned away, pretended to look for something in her purse until I left. A bad feeling settled in my stomach. Did you say something? Did you ask? I asked Linda if I'd done something wrong. She just shook her head and told me she was in a hurry because her next appointment was arriving. But Mom, her schedule was empty. I saw it. The next day, Caroline got a message from her best friend from college, Patricia, or rather, who had been her best friend. The message said, "Caroline, I'm sorry, but I think we need to take a break. My husband works in the same industry as Brad, and he says this whole situation is very complicated. I can't afford to get involved. I hope you understand. Wishing you all the best." Caroline showed me the message with trembling hands. Patricia and I were roommates for 4 years in college. 4 years, Mom. She was my maid of honor. And now she's abandoning me because her husband says it's complicated. People are afraid. When there's power and influence involved, it's not just Patricia. Look, she showed me her Instagram. She'd lost almost 200 followers in the last few days. Her latest post, a photo of a sunset she'd taken from my garden, had only gotten 5 likes. Before, she used to get over 300. I checked the comments on her old posts. Someone was leaving anonymous messages. "Aren't you ashamed of destroying a good man's life? Everyone knows you caused this situation and now you're playing the victim. Your mother-in-law told the truth. You're a manipulator." When did these comments start? About a week ago. I delete them, but they keep appearing, every time from different accounts. It was an organized campaign. I recognized it immediately. I'd seen this tactic before in other high-profile cases. "Hortensia," I said, "you think she's behind this?" "I'm certain." And I was right. 2 days later, my assistant Linda called me urgently. "Margaret, you need to see this." She sent me a link to a blog. It was called The Truth Behind False Accusations. It was anonymous but professionally designed. The most recent post was titled, "The Case of Brad M., When a Corrupt Family Destroys an Innocent Man." I read with growing horror. The article portrayed Brad as a loving, successful husband, victim of a radical feminist attorney, me, and her manipulative daughter, Caroline. It said we'd invented everything to keep his money, that we had a history of falsely accusing men, that I'd been reprimanded for unethical conduct multiple times. Every single word was a lie, but it was written so convincingly, with anonymous sources and confidential documents, with photos taken out of context. There was a photo of Caroline at a party, laughing and holding a glass of wine. The caption said, "This is what a traumatized woman looks like. Caroline Morrison, days after destroying her husband's life." The photo had been taken 6 months before the abuse, at a work dinner. But without context, it looked like proof she was lying. There was another photo of me leaving the courthouse looking serious. The caption said, "Margaret Sullivan, known for her aggressive tactics and hatred of men, found her next victim in her own son-in-law." "This is pure defamation," I told Linda. "I'm going to sue." "There's more," she said, her voice tight. "The blog has been shared almost 5,000 times in the last 48 hours. It's on Facebook groups, Twitter. There's even a hashtag, Justice for Brad." I felt dizzy. How is this possible? Someone's paying to promote it. Probably bots, fake accounts, paid influencers. This is a professional smear campaign, Margaret. I showed the blog to Caroline. I watched her read it with tears streaming down her face. "They're destroying my reputation," she whispered. "They're making it look like everything is my fault. What will people at work think? What will my colleagues think?" As if the universe had heard her question, her phone rang. It was her boss at the pharmaceutical company, Dr. Harrison. Caroline put it on speaker. "Caroline, we need to talk," Dr. Harrison said without preamble. His voice sounded uncomfortable. "I've heard some rumors about your personal situation. Dr. Harrison, I can explain. I don't need explanations. But you need to understand that this company has an image to protect. We can't be associated with scandals, whether they're true or false." My blood boiled. "Dr. Harrison," I interjected. "I'm Margaret Sullivan, Caroline's mother and her legal representative. What you're suggesting sounds dangerously close to wrongful termination based on her status as a victim of domestic violence, which is protected under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 151B. Silence on the other end. "I'm not firing anyone," the doctor finally said. I'm simply suggesting that Caroline might need some time off. Paid leave, of course, until this all gets resolved. For how long? Caroline asked, her voice shaking. Indefinitely. For now. He hung up. Caroline sank onto the sofa. They're destroying me, Mom. Systematically. My social life, my reputation, now my job. What's next? I didn't have to wait long to find out. That same afternoon, my accountant, Ernest, called me with alarming news. Margaret, we have a problem. Someone's filed a report with the IRS claiming you've been evading taxes for years. What? That's absurd. I know. Your records are impeccable, but now you'll have to prove it. They're going to audit your firm. All your cases from the last 5 years. Every account. Who filed the report? It's anonymous. But Margaret, they came with documents. Falsified documents, I'm sure, but very well done. Someone invested time and money in this. Patricia, Brad, their network of influence. They were attacking on all fronts. How long will the audit take? Months, maybe a year. And in the meantime, your reputation will be under scrutiny. Clients will have doubts. Cases might get delayed. Calculated reputational damage. I hung up and looked at Caroline. They're playing dirty. What are we going to do? The same thing I always do. Fight with the truth. But even as I said those words, I felt the pressure. For the first time in my 30 years of practice, I felt real fear. Not for me, but for my daughter. For what this war could do to her. The following days brought more revelations. We discovered that Patricia had been organizing meetings with the wives of influential men in her social circle. She told them her version of the story, that Caroline was an unstable woman who'd seduced her son for his money. Ironic, considering Caroline had more money than Brad. That I'd manipulated her into filing false charges. That they, as good women, should protect their own husbands from false accusations by supporting Brad. It was brilliant, in a twisted way. Patricia had turned the case into a class and gender war, portraying herself and her son as victims of a feminist conspiracy, and many women believed her. One afternoon, Caroline received a message on Instagram from an unknown account. The message was brief, but chilling. Nice house in Beacon Hill. Would be a shame if something happened to it. It included photos. Photos of our house taken from the street. Photos of the windows. Photos of the garden. I immediately called Captain Morrison. This is direct intimidation, I said. I need protection. Attorney, I can put extra patrols on your street, but I don't have resources for 24-hour protection. If something happens, which I hope it doesn't, document everything. Install security cameras. Be careful. That night, I installed cameras, reinforced the locks, bought a new alarm system, and for the first time in years, I slept with my phone next to the bed, ready to call 911 at any moment. Caroline was in her room, but she wasn't sleeping. I could hear her crying softly through the wall. I got up and went to her room. I found her sitting on the bed, surrounded by old photographs, photos of her and college friends, photos with work colleagues, photos from her wedding. I was thinking, she said without looking at me, about how everything can be destroyed so quickly. 2 months ago, I had a life. I had friends, a career, a home, a husband. I thought I knew who I was. And now I have nothing. You have me. I know, and I'm grateful. But Mom, I'm tired. So tired of fighting, of defending myself, of justifying my existence, of proving over and over that I'm not lying. She turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw something that terrified me. Surrender. Sometimes I think, she continued, that it would be easier to just call him, to apologize, to say I overreacted, to go back to him. At least then it would all be over. Caroline, no. Why not? Look at what's happening. They're destroying you, me, everything Dad built. Your firm, your reputation, my career, everything. Is it worth it? Is 3 incidents really worth all this? I sat next to her and held her face in my hands, forcing her to look at me. Listen carefully. This is exactly what they want. They want you to give up. They want you to believe that you're the problem. They want you to think that abuse is preferable to battle. But I'm so tired. I know, sweetheart. I know. But you need to understand something. This darkness you feel now, this exhaustion, this fear, it's temporary. But if you go back to him, if you surrender, that will be permanent. Or until he kills you. He wouldn't kill me. You don't know that. And you can't risk your life betting that his violence has limits. Because I guarantee you, sweetheart, it doesn't. Caroline leaned on my shoulder like she used to when she was little, and the world seemed too big. How did you do it, Mom? How did you fight for so many women for so many years without getting tired? I got tired, all the time. But your father reminded me why I did it. He said, Margaret, every woman you save is someone's daughter. She's the daughter we'd hope someone would save if Caroline ever needed it. I paused, feeling the weight of the irony. I never thought it would be our own daughter who needed saving. But here we are. And I swear on your father's memory that I won't let Brad win. I won't let him destroy you, even if I have to fight his entire army of liars. What if we lose? Then we lose knowing we fought with the truth, that we didn't surrender, that we didn't let fear dictate our decisions. And that, my daughter, is a victory in itself. We stayed there, holding each other, as outside the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Tomorrow would bring new battles. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply be a 58-year-old woman, a mother, an attorney, a widow, a survivor. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the last kind Robert had taught me to make, and silently toasted, to my husband, who taught me what true love is, to my daughter, who found her strength in darkness, to all the women who came before us, clearing the way, and to all those who will come after, walking the paths we helped create. Violence didn't win. Fear didn't win. Corrupt power didn't win. We won. 2 women who refused to be silenced, who refused to be destroyed, who refused to accept that violence was their destiny. And in that resistance, we found something more precious than any legal victory: our voice, our dignity, our freedom. If you're listening to this and you recognize your story and mine, I want you to know something. You're not alone. You're not crazy. It's not your fault. And yes, there is a way out. You might not see it now. You might feel trapped. You might love the person hurting you, and that's confusing. All of that is normal. But listen to me carefully. You deserve love that doesn't hurt. You deserve respect without conditions. You deserve to live without fear. And when you're ready, when you finally say enough, there will be people there to help you. Attorneys, therapists, shelters, family, friends. You might lose things along the way. I lost friendships, reputation, years of peace. But I gained something more important. I got my daughter back, and she got her life back. So thank you for listening to the end. Thank you for letting me share this story I kept to myself for too long. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe for more stories of women who transformed their pain into wisdom. Every day, one woman, one life lesson. Share this story with someone you love. Sometimes a story like this can change a day. It can change a life. Remember, true love never hurts. Never. Until next time. With love, Margaret Sullivan, a mother who saved her daughter and a daughter who saved her own life.